Hey everyone, Nubkeks here, and today is our first look at Mythic raid testing for patch 9.1, the Sanctum of Domination. We're going to be checking out the first two bosses in reverse order, boss 2 first, then boss 1 in today's video. If you want to see the heroic testing of these bosses where I explain their basic mechanics, all those videos are already up on the channel, so go check them out. Without any further ado, I guess, let's dive in. The first boss we're going to be looking at here today then is the Eye of the Jailer, the second boss of the instance. And unfortunately, I was really impressed with this on heroic difficulty, but on mythic difficulty, it's actually not very good at all. I actually think they made the fight worse, which is a real bummer. P1, I think, is bad though because of a bug. Basically what was happening is that these Stygian abductors, right, these flying mossworn, they're supposed to attempt to kidnap people, right? They throw chains at players. It will split the chains between as many players as can be stacked within, like, on top of the targeted player as possible. So the idea should be, in theory, that hey, if 2 or 3 people get the chains, they're going to be pulled off almost instantly and they're screwed. Whereas if all of your raid group coordinates, they all get in and split the chains, then the pull is very weak and you can actually then pull the abductor onto the platform and kill the abductor. That's supposed to be the theory. Now, in practice, this was not working. The abductor basically didn't pull anyone. It just put chains on, which were, as far as I could tell, effectively just a visual. So that was really, really disappointing. It's way too easy. Just not appropriate for a mythic fight. So I hope they fix it. Let's work on the assumption that they do fix it. I think if that is fixed, then this phase will actually be pretty decent. There's a new mythic mechanic here as well, where for us, well, I guess for everyone, because it's a set 20 people raid, about 3 people get these big slowing circles around them. So it does damage to anyone that stood in these circles, and it slows players by 50% if they're in the circles. And that does overlap with the abductor coming in quite often. So that's actually pretty cool, I think. Right, you know, make sure that you get out of the group quickly with those slowing circles, because hey, if the slowing circle goes on top of players that have been chained by an abductor, it should basically mean that they die because they can't run away and they get pulled off the edge. They're too slow. So I think that would be pretty cool. That would be fine. But yeah, unfortunately, you know, the main sort of mechanic of that phase just wasn't working with the abductors, which sucks. Also, one concern, which I don't think will be fixed, I think it is sort of intended, is that once you pull the abductor onto the platform, they don't really do anything. It's just a tank and spank ad that doesn't really seem dangerous. You're not in any rush to kill them. They don't seem to do much damage or anything like that. So I would like to see that changed, but seeing as it's the second boss, I can appreciate that maybe it's just supposed to be that simple. But unfortunately, it is the mythic mechanic of the intermission of phase 2 that makes this fight a lot less interesting, actually, in my opinion. So this is the phase where 2 of these little eyes come down on each side of the platform, and the main boss goes away, and you have to kill each of these little ads. On heroic difficulty, the ads would get empowered, I think, if they were within 30 yards or 20 yards of each other, so they had to be loosely spread out. And you'd have to kill them both at the same time, or, within a few seconds of each other. But for range DPS, for multi-dotters, like I'm playing a Shadow Priest, this is a Shadow Priest perspective especially, it was very fun because you could, multi-dot those ads. You could sort of switch between the two to make sure that the health bars were even. So it's quite entertaining. While at the same time, you're periodically dropping these permanent pools on the ground around you. And that actually made for quite an interesting puzzle, in my opinion, right? Because you're just making sure that you are DPSing the ads evenly and making sure that those puddles were placed in such a way that you could be in a position to actually attack both bosses, right? Because it's sort of like this, a really long, flat triangle, I guess, where you want to be sort of in the middle with the 2 bosses there. And that sort of positioning requirement was actually quite interesting, I thought. Unfortunately, on mythic difficulty, these mini bosses now apply a stacking debuff, a stacking dot on any player that is within 70 yards of that mini boss. And if you touch a player with the opposite debuff to you, I think one of the ads puts on Scorn and one of the ads puts on Ire. They're the names of the 2 debuffs. So if someone with Scorn goes near someone with Ire, they both instantly die and also instantly kill anyone who is within 10 yards of them. So pretty bad. And I believe that the way this is supposed to be done is that you simply split your raid into 2 10-man teams. They go into the opposite sides of the platform. And that's basically it, right? That you just, DPS race these ads down, and that's it. So there's no multi-dotting. There's no, choosing which one to target and that sort of decision making. You're just DPS racing your one down, and the raid should be split up in such a way that both eyes will have the same amount of DPS on them and die at the same time. So that was much less interesting. Dropping the pools becomes way easier. You just drop them on your edge, right? You're not thinking about, oh, well, I need to be in a position to hit both bosses, but I also need to be in a position to drop these pools and moving around them and that sort of complex movement. No, it was much simpler. It was just, well, I just drop the pools on my edge as far away from the other side as possible, and that's really it. It's a very simple calculation. And yeah, unfortunately, it's just much less interesting. There is a lot of damage in this phase. As you fight those ads, that the dot keeps stacking and stacking, which is obviously quite tricky. The healing gets fairly intense in this phase. There's a Titanic Death laser that the main boss does during this phase, which is a massive raid-wide damage clap. Does a ton of damage. So that was much better. I thought for healers, there's a lot more going on in this phase, which is good. But yeah, for DPS, I thought this was a lot less interesting. So I was quite disappointed. For me, I'd hope there would be some iteration on this. We'll see. But it ended up being fairly dull. Also, I don't know. Everything just felt like it had quite a lot of health. It's quite a long fight. You have to go through 3 of these intermissions. They're not that interesting. So yeah, unfortunately for me, this ended up being a rather uninspiring boss. I think it will be a lot more fun. Like I said, once they fix P1, once those abductors are an actual threat and are actually working as intended, I think that'll be fun. It just felt like LF4, to be honest. It kind of felt like LF4, which is not what you want in your Mythic raid. But yeah, once that is fixed and those are more of a threat, P1 becomes a lot more fun. The intermission, I don't know. I honestly think that they should rethink the Mythic mechanic. But hey, if they go with it, we'll see. DPS check essentially is what it is. It's a DPS check on a second boss in the raid, which means it's very easy. A very easy DPS check just isn't great. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Luckily, the next boss we looked at is better. The next boss we got to test was the first boss of the raid on Mythic difficulty. It is the Tarragrue. This boss is great fun. This boss is Mythic mechanics done right. It is fantastic. One of the first things to note is it does look like they have changed the selection of anima powers. As you guys probably know, before you fight this boss, there is some trash in the area around him. There's sort of 4 little mini bosses. They don't take long to kill at all. But when you kill them, you do get an anima power. It does look like they have mixed up the selection of anima powers. The amount of powers that exist that will troll your team seem to be reduced. Like there was one that kept knocking other players away, which is really bad. That seems to be gone, all that sort of stuff, I think. So it's much better. The anima power selection is much better. So that's nice. Other good news in terms of just one quick quality of life change, which is definitely needed, is they did make the intermission phase of this fight, the mist phase where you have to run to the one safe spot in the room. They made that a lot more visible, a lot more visually distinct. It's a lot more clear. Again, I thought that was a great change. I just felt like certainly on heroic difficulty, it was way too difficult to see. Just in the room, it just the visuals didn't stand out. So you can compare the footage from this and the heroic fight. It's much clearer, so that is great. So the big change here on this fight, though, for Mythic difficulty is that the Remnant of Forgotten Torments mechanic has been upped an awful lot, which is great. The way this works is that it calls in this gray circle. It can be a fire damage dot, it can be an increase to physical damage taken or an increase to magic damage taken. It has essentially 5 charges on the circle, 5 orbs in the circle. And while the circle is active, it applies the full effect to everyone in the raid, which is really bad. So you need to go in and soak them and absorb those charges onto players to remove the effect. On heroic difficulty, there would be 1 circle would appear at a time. On Mythic difficulty, it's up to 2, and on top of that, on heroic difficulty, these debuffs would last for 1.5 minutes. On Mythic, they last for the entire fight. So this actually becomes a lot more interesting, right? So, for example, the physical damage taken one increases your physical damage taken by 10% per stack. The magic damage one increases your magic damage taken by 10% per stack. And then the fire one, I think, puts a dot for around 4,000. damage every 5 seconds on you per stack. So what makes this fun is that the fight basically just ramps up constantly in difficulty, right? It ramps up and ramps up and ramps up because there's just more and more of these torments being built up on your group. And obviously they can interact with each other in nasty ways, right? If you get stacks of the increased magic damage taken, but also stacks of the fire damage dot, yeah, the magic damage taken makes the fire dot worse, which is bad. But yeah, it just works really well. Like the fight just gets more and more intense over time. And then, of course, when you bring the Tarragrue to 10 or 15% health, I can't remember which one, he goes into an enrage. He basically picks all the raid up, stuns them in the air for a couple of seconds, takes away your anima powers, and then he gets 500% damage increase done. He does 500% more damage. So your tanks just have to start kiting him. He starts running around one-shotting anyone he reaches. Everyone has lots of torments on them. So it's just a nice, intense ramp up to the fight where it just gets harder and harder and harder in a really fun way. In terms of the best way to deal with these mechanics, I actually think it's not too bad. I think it's generally about rough rules of thumb, really. Which is that, hey, you know, the torment that increases your physical damage taken, the tanks should not take that. Do not take that if you're a tank. But pretty much anyone else can take it because there really isn't any other major source of physical damage in the fight. Likewise, you've got your magic damage taken increase and your fire dot. It's probably a good idea not to do those. So again, you could probably split the raid 50-50. Have half of the people assigned to take the increased magic damage, have half of the people taking the fire dot, and just have them evenly spread over everyone. And again, that probably just handles the mechanic just fine. It's possible, perhaps, with some anima powers and stuff that you could cheese it and stack these really high in an individual player, or just sacrifice individual players. I think that could work too. Honestly, it's the first boss of the raid. You're going to be fairly flexible in how you handle it. It's not going to be very hard. It's really more about just the feeling of the fight and the flavor of the fight, and it really does nail that. I think it really, really does. That ramping difficulty, making sure that you absolutely have to soak those torments quickly. The mist phase is fun as well, you know, avoiding those patches on the floor. The boss enrage at the end is awesome. It's really cool. And everyone has those torments built up, and he's just running around smacking dudes down. It's fun. It is good. So yeah, again, I actually think this is a great boss. It's really nice. The mythic mechanic is great. It actually makes you think a lot more about those torments. They feel more impactful. There's a very nasty damage dot that he puts out on people as well. A really hefty magic damage dot, which is rough. So that's why it's, I think, a bad idea to stack the increased magic damage taken and the fire dot. Because if you get the shadow dot that the boss also throws out, which I think hits for like 14,000 damage every 2 seconds or something like that. If that starts getting amped up by the increased magic damage taken, and you also have like 20k ticks of fire damage dot, like you're gonna die extremely fast. Not good. So yeah, there you go. That is the Tarragrue. I think he's great. Pretty much good to go as is. Yeah, just a fun boss. Cool. You know, just go in, have a blast. Don't worry about the DPS meters or whatever. The mechanics are fairly forgiving, but they're cool. And that's it. So guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think of these bosses. Do they look cool? Again, my opinion generally is that the Tarragrue is really fun. Seems to be tuned pretty well. Just a great fun boss with ramping difficulty that Mythic makes better and more fun. The Eye of the Jailer, I think, is a really cool boss visually and has a great theme and some great mechanics, but unfortunately, I think partially due to a bug and partially, unfortunately, due to the Mythic change to the intermission phase, it's actually a lot less enjoyable here in this raid testing than it was on heroic difficulty. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some more tweaks to that boss and it will get improved. But thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
2 mil.
Look at this. Look at this.
Oh, actually nerf DKs.
It's not even DK, it's necro.
Run. 3%. Execute phase. Where's Warrior?
Don't
Fun.
reset him.
I like that.
Warrior died.
You can't reset them.
Because the tanks really aren't doing
Song
anything else
goes
in the
to the
fight,
side.
so
Run by
something for
Rude.
them to do for the last
He
second.
cornered him.
I think they will kill him.
And
300k.
500%.
They're definitely killing him. Alright, well, I guess we only have 20 minutes
Look at
left
that.
anyway.
We're 1 out of 10 mythic.
Fuck.
Oh.
There we go. Easy.
We can now start